Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me here today and taking the time out of your busy days to discuss this issue. So before I get started, I kind of want to give a brief introduction about who I am and what I'm going to be discussing today. So my name is Anita Tindawani, and I work in the finance department at the Sites of Conscience. I am also the child of two immigrants who, for the majority of their lives, made a living as entrepreneurs and are probably the inspiration behind me doing this webinar. Aside from being very passionate about these issues. So I have seen the many benefits of what a successful business can bring, but also the many setbacks that Black entrepreneurs have to overcome in order to prosper in the same ways as their white counterparts do. So today, with racial injustices that exist at almost every level for Black people, I want to explore the importance of how we spend and how we can financially uplift these communities. So that's kind of going to be the whole narrative and the angle that I'll be discussing today. So moving on to the first slide, I want to dive into some of the historical ways that Black businesses have been put at a significant disadvantage. So the first slide that I have is discussing some of these issues. Oh, Camilla, you can go to the next slide. So at this point, we are all fully aware of the systemic racism that has existed in this country for years and years and years, and continues to live on today, as we see with the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that are going on in response to George Floyd's death. So this oppression has been maintained and practiced in every form possible and has shaped how we view and treat the Black community. So that's kind of like a significant part about how Black entrepreneurs have continuously been oppressed. But connected to that, there have been historical events that have occurred, like the massacre of Tulsa's Black Wall Street in 1921, which destroyed 40 blocks of Black-owned businesses. And this destruction claimed the lives of an estimated 300 Black Tulsans and displaced another 10,000. And then we also see the destruction of Seneca Village, which we now know as Central Park, where there were thriving, fluent Black communities that were, again, destroyed and kind of prevented Black communities from being able to prosper in that industry. So the population of this village was 2/3 Black and provided many of these people with residential stability and investment for their futures. But now that both things have been destroyed, there's kind of nothing that people have historically been able to build off of. So now moving forward to the present day, the problem that continues and is very pertinent for a lot of people today is COVID-19, which has disproportionately affected small Black-owned businesses. And that doesn't mean that a lot of people who are experiencing COVID, haven't been impacted by it, but a lot of these communities have been impacted in a much larger scale. In fact, 41% of Black-owned businesses in the US have gone under in the wake of COVID-19, which was reported by the National Bureau of Economic Research. So aside from just people getting sick and dying and experiencing this, a lot of people who are still trying to make a living and are prospering have had their businesses completely deteriorated, and being Black has put them at an even more significant disadvantage for that. And then lastly, the report from Business Insider in February of this year reported that only 4 of the current Fortune 500 CEOs are Black. So if you think about, there being a whole pool of other CEOs that are not people of color or Black, it kind of puts things in perspective to realize how small the pool is for Black entrepreneurs and how little they're recognized. So now I'm going to be moving on to today to discuss some of the ways that we can tackle this issue from the lens that we're at, which is the museum industry. So after quite a bit of research and back and forth with Braden, who I'm sure most of you know, I pulled together a couple of tools that I think can help us get to some of the answers to the questions that I presented, or some of the issues that are that we're facing. So tool number 1 would be identifying the barriers of entry. So we do this by identifying how and why Black businesses are being excluded from these spaces. So we think about gentrification of Black neighborhoods. What does that do for Black communities? Many don't see merit in Black companies or Black ideas. So Black people are already at a disadvantage systematically, but there's also this idea that what they create or what they do is not valued because people have not been exposed to it in the way that they've been exposed to other forms of business or, ideas that have thrown into society. And then another thing is Black businesses struggle to secure bank loans. So I think my parents experienced this firsthand, where they once COVID-19 specifically occurred, it took them way longer than it took a lot of other companies to get their money, maybe for other reasons as well, but definitely a lot of Black entrepreneurs see the issue of not getting money strictly because of their race. So we have to look at that issue as well and how we can address that. And then wealth and opportunities in the United States are unequally distributed. So like I mentioned before, when I was discussing the problem both historically and currently, Black businesses have been destroyed for years and years, and it continues to happen. So a lot of these Black entrepreneurs have nothing to build off of. They don't have the generational wealth that a lot of white communities have to continue to pass down success. It's almost like starting from the bottom over and over and over again. So we have to acknowledge that, wealth and opportunities are not distributed in the same way. So then moving on to the next tool, which is very much connected to the first tool, we have to begin to create generative spaces. So a quote that I found in one of the articles I was reading that really stood out to me was that you shouldn't just buy one thing, congratulate yourself, and head straight back into the clutches of Jeff Bezos. So this quote is a little bit funny, but I think it's really relevant and important to acknowledge is that we can't just do one thing and then assume that it'll change the entire system, right? We can't buy something from a Black-owned business and then buy 90% of the stuff from Amazon or from companies that are flourishing in this way. We have to, again, be a part of redistributing the wealth. So if we're going to invest in a Black community, it's not just buying that one item, it's investing in them fully, giving them a space for their artwork, giving them a platform to discuss what they're going to be selling. And all those other stuff that comes with it. So that also ties into being an incubator for small businesses. So I know museums typically have a large amount of space. They have a lot of networking opportunities that they can provide for these young or more flourished Black entrepreneurs who are looking for into the business or are looking for a space to have their name or their work recognized and appreciated. And then another important thing is to shift taste making, because the same people who are responsible for putting together exhibitions have a say in what makes it onto store shelves. So when we think about when people come to visit museums, a lot of what they end up doing, or a lot of what's at the end of a museum, is the gift stores. And these gift stores have the ability of reinforcing what people value or reinforcing what people experience while they're experiencing the exhibitions in the museum. So for allowing these spaces to reflect accurate stories and reflect the people that are creating these pieces, then we can allow people who come to the museums to take home a piece of accurate history that also supports Black businesses in that way. And then lastly, which is connected to the second bullet point, is influential gift stores can financially stabilize Black creators. So if we think about art pieces like the Mona Lisa, or we think about, very distinct and important artworks that have existed in history, they are important because of the way that they're reinforced or the way that they're become influential by how these artists are repeatedly supported. So by creating these gift stores that financially stabilize Black creators, it allows them to have some kind of financial income that can allow them to continue to produce and provide for these gift stores in a way that allows consumers to have access to it on a day-to-day basis as well. Or I should say on a visitation basis. So moving on to the third tool, which is direct support. And again, both the first and second tool are ways to directly support the communities, but these are ways that we can internally support them first. So one of the ways is to start thinking about how we can celebrate cultures that have been erased or neglected. So a lot of what we celebrate, or the things that we acknowledge, the holidays that we acknowledge, are because we either have them as federal holidays, or we just have been taught to value these things above other stuff. So we have to take the time and make the effort to celebrate cultures that are not being acknowledged, that are not being recognized in the way that other holidays or other cultures are. And that definitely is not an easy thing to do, because again, now with COVID and all the other setbacks that we have, museums don't really have the space to do so, to celebrate these cultures in events or in gatherings or festivals and stuff like that. But we do have other ways of doing so. So the way that we can acknowledge a holiday or culture as it is occurring. I know this is a holiday that passed quite a while back, but Juneteenth is definitely something that people are paying more attention to and are acknowledging the importance of more. And so even through things like COVID-19, we can make efforts to discuss these cultures and have our communities understand why they're important and how we should acknowledge them, to shed more light on Black communities. And then we should also start thinking about purchases outside of gift shops. So I know I discussed discussed before about how important it is to support Black creators and Black industries in that way. But I think we also have to discuss how we can support them separate from those gift shops, because those are only a fraction of what it will take to give Black communities the platform that they need. So we also have to think about, who are we buying from? Who are we investing in? Where are we getting our maintenance materials? Who are the artworks? What are the artworks that we're showing? Because what we show has such a significant impact on what is valued. So thinking again above and beyond just the gift shops, because that's only a fraction, a small amount of how we can support these communities. And then another thing is providing financially accessible opportunities. So this point for me connected directly back to how we celebrate cultures. And so the way that we can do so is providing financially accessible opportunities is by renting out the spaces that we have in these museums at reasonable prices, prices that these individuals can afford to do. Because a lot of it is just not having the financial means to do something can be a setback in and of itself. So just, first of all, not having the platform, but then again, not having the financial means to have a space for your work in that way. And then lastly, working towards becoming change agents. Being a change agent means something different for everybody, right? So we can't just say, this is a definition, this is how you'll do it. But I think it's very important to kind of discuss and get an idea of what it means to be a change agent. For me, at the very beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, I was very insistent about going to the protests. I would ask my mom and my dad nonstop if I could go, but of course they had their reasons why they didn't want me to go, in terms of, the pandemic going on, and my exposure to that could be heightened because of the amount of people that would be there. And then the protests were getting a little bit dangerous as well, and they worried about that for me, being that I'm small, and for other reasons as well. So for me, it was something that was so important to me that wasn't going to stop me from doing something to participate in the movement. And so I was introduced to this idea of being a change agent. And basically, again, that means something different for everybody, but it just means that you have to find a way to support the movement that is most effective for your own individual or for the industry that you're working in. So in the museum industry, we all need to kind of start to establish how we can do so, how we can be change agents. That doesn't always mean that we have to be at the front line protesting or fighting for it in that way, but how can we participate in the movement and be just as effective? So that's something that I think we can all think about individually or within our own communities, but it's definitely something that I encourage all of you to explore and understand much deeper and find the definition that's unique to your own situation. So those are the 3 tools that I have for all of you. So I'm going to segue now into the discussion questions, which will be connected to kind of what I was presenting about previously. So if you would all like to take a second to take notes or write down the questions, just because we're going to do it in breakout room style to give you all a chance to discuss in smaller groups. But these are the 3 questions that I want to give you guys as guidelines, but feel free to branch in new questions, introduce new ideas. This is just like a stepping stone for all of you. So the first question is, who are you buying from? So again, this ties into the gift shops, but it also ties into the maintenance materials that you use for your museums and all these other elements. Who are you buying from? What are your buying factors? And then lastly, how can museums help alleviate this problem? So now that I've gone through all the slides, I've given you guys the tools, I've given you a little bit of background about the problem and some of the ways that I think that we can fix this issue. I want all of you to take a second in your small groups to discuss how you individually believe this problem can be alleviated and the steps that museums as a whole can take to do so. And now I think Camilla or Linda is going to break you out into rooms and we can further the discussion. We'll do that for about 5 minutes and then we'll come back in and we'll have a group discussion to conclude. Thank you everybody for sharing. I really appreciated hearing how you're all individually doing your own part.
And Nicole, one quick thing, I feel like it would be really interesting to follow up about some of the other work that Coalition does and in the context you're having about the Market House. So I'd be, if it's fine with you, I will shoot you a quick email afterwards for a longer conversation.
Okay, that's fine.
So that would be great. Thanks.
Hi. I hope everybody got a chance to discuss. I think everybody's back, right? Yeah, everybody's back. Okay, great. Well, I guess we can just open it up briefly if people have things that they heard in their group that they'd like to share. The group that I was in, we mainly discussed what their organizations are currently doing and the issues that they've been plagued with. I know Rachel was talking about COVID kind of distorting the financial element of the changes that they wanted to make, but still having intentions of doing stuff to be more inclusive in that way. So did anybody hear anything significant they'd like to share with the group, or just something that they personally discussed? Okay, that's okay as well. Well, I appreciate everybody for participating in the discussion groups and being a part of this. I just want to thank Linda and Elizabeth for both giving me the platform to do so. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about. Like I said before, both of my parents are entrepreneurs, and I've grown up the majority of my life in the United States. And I think it's very important that a lot of the issues that I've been plagued with as a Black woman, as well as seeing other communities suffer in that way, that I use the platform that I have with the community that I have with all of you here to be a voice for change for them as well. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating in this discussion and giving me the time to speak about it and how I think we can best solve the issue.
So Anita, and thanks so much, because I think your tools were really concrete. And I think that's something we heard in the small group, and I hope the other small groups that did as well, was the idea that looking at, you know, your gift shop, looking at your other suppliers, thinking about who in the neighborhood you can begin to lift up. Nicole shared some great things about a space, you know, across the street from them and about how to begin to use it. And I think Mark had this really interesting point that particularly state institutions, governmental institutions are less flexible in many ways, but you can still continue to make suggestions, continue to look for new kinds of vendors. And I think that's one of the real takeaways, is that all of us, no matter where we are, can make a difference. And I'm going to add one more thing. I see at least one person not from the US. Hi, Stefano. And to kind of, right, this, you can think about this. Oh, sorry, that's my phone. You can think about this in any context. You know, and you talked about other marginalized groups as well, Anita. And I think that's a really important takeaway, is that this conversation can happen about migrants and refugees in your community, people who've been marginalized for one reason or another, no matter where you are, that all of us can have that responsibility. And I think you gave everybody some great tools.
Thank you, Linda. And I think on the same note as well, I think even with the issues that COVID has presented for all of us, I think it's also become kind of a restart for a lot of people. I know my parents with their business, they've had to kind of change their whole approach entirely because of the way that the market is changing in that way. So like Linda was saying, we don't only have to look at it from the lens of a museum industry, we can look at it from so many different angles.
Great. Any other final questions or thoughts from anybody? Okay, we will send, I think we usually send follow-ups about this. Camilla's gonna have to remind me, I haven't done a webinar short in a while. And as always, we always ask you to fill out our post-webinar survey. Thank you, Camilla, for putting it in the chat room. These post-webinar evaluations are so helpful to us at the Coalition. It helps us identify future issues. It helps make the case for the importance of what we're doing to all of you. So please take a minute and complete it. Thank you, Anita, again. It was great to have you present, and have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.